Welcome back to Grow the Future, where we explore the fascinating world of horticulture. I'm your host, Dr. Melinda Knuth, and today we're looking at plant labels. Have you ever thought why people pay more for brand name products? Let's find out. In general, what is a label for? Labels are meant to identify a product or a brand and to convey that information about how the item that the label is attached to should be used. This allows customers to make informed decisions about purchasing decisions. Retailers use labels to differentiate different brands from each other and to define their brand identity. And they do this through the presentation of the brand on the label. Labeling allows businesses to build trust and loyalty with their customers. Without this information, it simply is a product, and it doesn't convey any additional value or information other than the presentation of the product. In horticulture specifically, labels help communicate to the customer what the plant is, how they should care for it, and why they should choose it. So this can help them understand if this is going to be a red chrysanthemum versus an orange chrysanthemum, especially if it's not quite in bloom yet. This is especially important for the horticulture industry as popular brands attract customer attention because of the loyalty that's been built. And some really good examples of this are brands like Proven Winners, Bonnie's, and Southern Living. All three of these are highly recognizable by the end consumer and provide information about the quality and the type of product that the consumer is going to get. So, to have a good label, it needs two primary pieces of information. It needs to be functional and it needs to have marketing information and be marketable. For functional, it needs to provide clear care information, and usually this includes the plant, so what is it specifically, and different sourcing information. This is helpful especially for states like California that have stricter regulations on where plants come from and how they've been cared for in the growing process before they get to the end consumer. The other component that is needed for a good label is marketing, and this makes it eye-catching and draws attention to the product and builds upon it. It's like having excellent accessories on an outfit that you're wearing out, and it just accentuates what you're already doing. So, kind of a sidestepping into this and still setting the stage for what we're going to talk about today, another component is what are plant labels actually made of? The materials of a tag, or what we also call a label, those are synonyms used interchangeably, they need to be durable enough that they can withstand the growing process if you're putting the tag in right when the plant is put into its container. So many times they are of some sort of plastic, aluminum, or coated cardstock so that they can last through the time period that they're sold and potentially be kept in an outdoor setting so that the consumer can continue to look at it. Another reason that labels need to be long-lasting is consumers tend to hold on to these and refer back to them later. And this is also helpful for them to know if it's going to come back, if it is going to be a biannual, or if this is a one and done type plant. The location of labels on the product also matter. So you want the focus for the consumer to, of course, be on the product. This would be the container, this would be the plant, but you want your tag to be in a centralized location so that it can be easily viewed. Having stickers on the bottom of the pot is not ideal because sometimes the bottom of the pot can be wet and the tag can be wet, or it can be on the back of the pot and not viewable easily for the consumer. So you want them to be center, front, and available to be seen easily so that the product information as they're making their purchase decision is quick and they can find that information that they need. In 2019, a survey of over 500 U.S. garden shoppers was conducted by an industry-funded home garden panel. It showed that 90% of plant shoppers reference tags while shopping, and 6 out of 10 shoppers say tags influence their buying decision. So, what's the catch here in horticulture? We've been talking about how labels are necessary, how we should use them, it's used to convey information. So, what's a key thing that we need to keep in mind as horticulturalists? Well, plants in our industry are typically minimally packaged. It's usually the plant and the container that it's in. Sometimes it can have a product label that conveys information such as the plant name, but it might not hold other types of information depending on the size of your business and how sophisticated your tag is. So customers are really relying primarily on the appearance of the plant itself and any informational signs at the retail setting or online when they're trying to assess if they should purchase a plant. So providing tags that have adequate information and signage in the retail center that have adequate information are imperative. If the information is not directly on the product itself, aka slapped onto the plant, then it makes it much harder for the consumer to find that information, and then they are relying on the minimal information presented to them. So that's one way that we can influence and infiltrate the purchasing decision process, is providing that supplemental information through really nice tags. So, what details and information should retailers include on their plant labels to attract customers? How much information on a plant label is adequate, and is more always better? A study done by some colleagues of mine, which includes Behe, Ben Campbell, Charlie Hall, Khachatryan, revealed that there's 3 different types of plant buyers out there. There's those that are plant oriented, and this is about 73% of the total consumers out there. These people really are focusing on the plant themselves and spend the most time looking at the plant directly. Then there is production method orientated consumers. This is about 11% of the people who are buying our plants. And these are people who are focused on how the plant was produced. So they're interested in, was it produced organically, sustainably? Was it grown outdoors, indoors? What types of pesticides were applied to it? And any other production information related to how the plant was specifically grown. They're very interested in that. And lastly, there's the price-oriented individuals, and this is about 16% of the consumers that are buying plants. These people are focusing primarily on the price displayed, and they spend the most time looking at that information. So we kind of have 3 different bins of consumers who are coming and looking at our products: the plant people, the production people, and the price people. These 3 shopping categories really focus on different aspects of signage and labeling. And so depending on the type of consumer that you are interested in attracting, it depends on what information you want to display. Or perhaps, if you aren't certain, you're going to display all of these different types of information. So the core information that is included on most plant labels is the plant's Latin name and common name, sun exposure preference, meaning sun or shade, the watering needs that the plant needs, the maturity size of the plant, hardiness zone that it should be planted in or that it will survive in, the location it was sourced from, and this really caters to the production method focused consumers, and the price. This is especially important for price-oriented customers, but what we have found historically is that if there's not a price listed on the plant, this will deter all of the different types of consumers within horticulture. So regardless of if they're specifically price-oriented, you always need a price located on the product and easy to find so that they are able to make that decision. Now, where that price information is located does make a difference, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Other things that can be included on a label could be a photo of the plant in bloom, and this caters to the plant-oriented customers. So what does it look like when it's flowering? This is especially important for if you are selling bulbs, if you are selling shrubs and trees that perhaps might not currently be in bloom. You could also include the plant's taxonomy classification information, or also the specific cultivar that it is. Typically, this is also included, except for if this is a brand name, that's always going to be included. So if it's a specific one in a cultivar series, that's going to be in the name of the plant that's presented as the common name. You could also include the bloom season and the duration of the bloom season, as well as attributes of it, including pest resistance, drought tolerant, deer resistant, different attributes of that nature. Another attribute that you could include is also the fertilizer preference. So how much fertilizer should you apply to it? And this is really helpful, especially for those annuals and perennials that are putting on a lot of flowers. That can be helpful information for the consumer to know how much fertilizer they should be applying, or if they should be applying fertilizer at all. While these details aren't usually required to be on plant labels, voluntarily providing that information to consumers can really influence how they choose to purchase and if they're willing to pay more for the product. So that additional information does contribute to the total purchasing decision. It's not just extra fluff that the consumers are seeing. For indoor plants especially, providing detailed information about care and maintenance of plant is very helpful. Typically, these plants are marketed towards all knowledge bases, but what we're finding anecdotally, so evidence of this is still to be determined, but what we're finding anecdotally is that a lot of new people who are entering the horticulture industry as consumers are entering through the indoor houseplant category. So providing detail and care information can make these newer consumers more successful and potentially lead to their interest in going into other categories of horticulture and continuing this hobby in the future. Beginner gardeners are more likely to purchase plants with detailed care information, and I hope that's pretty intuitive to you, simply because if they don't know how to grow something, they're going to want a lot of information and they want to know specifically how to be successful. Now, this doesn't mean that you're going to write them a 3-page report on how to take care of this plant, but this does include details like keep the media damp or let it dry out a little bit. That kind of detail can lead to much better success with their plants in the future. A new category that we're seeing that was kind of popular and like edgy about 10 years ago, but is gaining a lot more popularity now and people are more regularly using them, are QR codes. So QR codes are becoming increasingly popular, and this can help share that additional information that you might not be able to share just on a plant label because it's small. It also can only convey a certain amount of information. So if you want to share that additional details or those additional attributes about your product, providing a QR code that leads to your web page can be an excellent resource for people to go find. Now, if you recall, in the last episode, we talked about smartphone usage, researching, and the digital space. And this directly ties into that as well, where people are doing pre-research on what they want to buy, and they are using their phones primarily to do so. So engaging them and inviting them to use their smartphone in your business with your plant labels directly builds that connection with your digital space and where they're looking for information. QR codes can also help retailers market better through labeling because they show how many people are also scanning the QR code and going to the web page. So you can see when they're going, where they're coming from, and also potentially, depending on how their cookies are set up, if they're physically in your business or if they're coming from their home or etc. So that kind of information can be very helpful so you know who is looking at your product information, when they are looking, and how they're looking at your information. Now, some plants also require mandatory or legal labeling, like edible plants and some patented cultivars. So plant patents protect the unique characteristics of that plant variety or cultivar, and that is expressed only for the patent holder to asexually propagate and to sell. Selling crops that are patented but you don't own the patent can be illegal, so it's important to know that distinction. So usually patented cultivars have a PP or a plain patent label. They also can have a trademark associated with them to protect the name of the product. And these products are often sold at a higher price because of their exclusive uniqueness. Some examples of this include wave petunia, knockout roses, and honeycrisp apples. Some edible plants also need pesticide treatment disclosures. This kind of depends on a state-to-state basis, as there's not a direct EPA regulation on this, but specifically in California, there are distinct requirements on labeling where it comes to disclosures to the consumer. These legal requirements are comparable to labeling in other industries such as food, cosmetics, and drugs, where these mandatory labels are enforced by the FDA and the FTC. That information is primarily regulated for businesses to include on their product labels. These industries are required to disclose information such as nutritional facts, net quantity, ingredients, allergens, safety warnings, and instructions for use. So even though we don't have directly required labels in that category, it is a similar type of disclosure for some of the edible plants in our industry. So there's the similar relationship there. Visual attention guides consumer behavior. Labels that catch the eye of the customer are likely to get attention. And if it is information that is interesting to the consumer, they're going to look at it longer and potentially think about the different alternatives in their product selection with this product in mind. So having your label stand out with bright colors and phrases is important. You want it to be visible, you want it to stand out from your plant, and you want it to contribute to the decision to purchase. So different eye tracking technologies record data on how individuals allocate their attention through the decision-making process. And this is a critical tool that we use as researchers to understand which attributes are most important by evaluating their response and their actions. So where are they looking? Where are they not looking? What are they consciously and unconsciously paying attention to or ignoring? Studies have shown a direct correlation between visual attention, so where a person is looking, and their attendance to different attributes or non-attributes. So what are they considering? What are they thinking about? This correlation helps infer their preference and eventually their behavior. So a study done by some colleagues and I that we have published in the Journal of Environmental Horticulture looked at different types of font size, color, and position on signage for plants. What we found is that red font indicated a sale, and this captured a lot of attention with our participants. However, this only worked when it was paired with larger font size as well. So red font and larger font indicated that there was a sale and they were more willing to purchase from that signage, even if it wasn't actually conveying that there was 20% off or buy 3 get 1 free. It was just the price with these different attributes of larger size and a different color from black. In general, larger font size was very beneficial in overall attracting customer gaze. So what we mean by this is instead of that 12 or that 16 font, if you're going up to 22, 30 font, we didn't test anything over 30 font size, but going up to those larger sizes did attract more consumer attention. So that did make a difference. Some work done by Sparke and Jang in the Frontiers of Psychology showed that where you place the price and different information about the product does also make a difference in their overall decision to purchase. What we know is that as English speakers and English readers, we're more likely to look at the left-hand information first and then continue on looking to the right-hand side. So we generally look left to right as a society. Societies that read right to left tend to look right first and then continue their gaze over to the left. If you're putting your price on the right-hand side and you're putting information about the plant or the product on the left-hand side, it's been shown to actually lead to better purchase intent rather than putting the price on the left. So what that means in layman's terms is that if they are looking at information about the plant and the product first, and they're looking at the price after that on the right-hand side, this actually leads to a better purchase intention. They're more likely to say, oh yeah, I am going to buy this product. So what you're doing is you're hacking the human psychology by creating this mental shortcut where people rely heavily on initial pieces of information. If they're going to look at price first, that's going to what is called anchor them in their perceptions. So they're going to be thinking about the price while they're reading the different pieces of information and inferring from that decision. However, if they're reading other pieces of information first and then seeing price, it's not going to anchor them in, okay, based on this information, is this price worth it or not? They're going to be thinking about the information first. I know that seems kind of nuanced, but the location of the price does ultimately make a difference. Another example of this is if you have the regular price on the left-hand side and if you have the sales price on the right-hand side, this also serves as a strong cognitive anchor, meaning that the sales price feels more like a bargain. So, for example, if you put, again, the regular price, let's say $9.99 on the left-hand side, they're going to see the bigger price first. Then they're going to continue reading and see, oh, it's 20% off. That actually can lead them to say, ooh, that is a discount. That is something that is going to be worth less money. Rather than seeing the discount, okay, it's 20% off of $9.99. Again, this may seem nuanced, so you might be like, okay, what the heck? But it has to do with the presentation of the initial information and the precedence that sets in the human brain when the additional information comes afterwards. So some other studies have suggested that visual attention may not always be a reliable predictor of individual preference, and that attention to information on signage is actually a significant predictor of product choice. So instead of saying, oh, you look at this longer, it has more to do with the pieces of information. And so what they're posing is that while positive, the correlation between visual attention and product choice is weak. And the reason I'm bringing this up as a big advocate of visual preference research is because we're still trying to understand this area more. This is not a set in stone area of research, and we are continuing to do more research to understand this relationship better between visual attention, product choice, the different information that's on signs, so that we can understand exactly what's going on. So though the jury's still out on exactly how this all works together, I think that there's much more work to be done. Therefore, with this piece of information in mind, it's important for retailers, aka you the listener, to take advantage of both attention information as well as details, so what words you're actually putting on labels, so that you are capturing the full picture of what the consumer is looking at. So consumer purchases are really influenced by their level of product involvement. So if they have low involvement, they probably are going to want more information. If they have high involvement, they already know a lot of information. They may not be seeking as much because they're already knowing a lot. So make sure that your label quickly communicates the value and benefits of the product. Now, you may be also saying, Melinda, you just said you need detailed information, but you need it also to quickly communicate. And so it really comes to having very specific words that, though brief, are communicating the value of what you're presenting here. So you're not going to be writing paragraphs. You're not going to be writing long sentences. You're going to have brevity, but you're going to have detail in that brevity. So a lot of adjectives to be describing what you're doing. So don't allow room for misinterpretation of the label. Be concise and be clear with what you're trying to convey. For plants specifically, clear and simple instructions can decrease post-purchase plant loss, and it also can decrease that dissatisfaction after purchase. Again, we're getting back to that concept of loyalty and repeat purchase. That is ultimately what we're trying to accomplish. And really ensuring that post-purchase satisfaction and delight is maintained is essential so that we keep them around and we keep them happy. As I mentioned before, brands use labels to build their identity and their loyalty with customers. And this is a really helpful tool for businesses in the long run because of salient branding. And this is the degree in which your brand is easily recognized. Salient branding may capture attention and influence decision making for customers. For example, recognizable horticulture brands such as Proven Winners have built an identity for themselves in the industry. They're known for the white pots. They're known for the really nice labeling, so plate labels that go in the pots. And with this information, people, as in the end consumer, are more likely to purchase from them because of this loyalty. So having these consistent brand messaging and consistent presentation of the product often are able to showcase the quality of the product just by having the name. Like when I say the name Proven Winners, it invokes a certain level of quality within your mind. Now, that level of quality differs person to person, and Proven Winners is trying to set what that is so it's consistent across people. But that's part of what they're doing with building their brand identity, is building the level of quality within everyone's mind so that it is consistent. These brands are often able to charge more for their products because loyal consumers are willing to pay more for the items because of the perception of the brand that is built up and because of their brand identity. However, salient branding doesn't apply to every industry. Studies have shown that customers are less likely to consider brands when choosing fresh fruits and vegetables. So this is an adjacent industry to our ornamentals. The visual aspects of the product, such as color and freshness, are more important in fruits and veggies than it is to evaluate the intrinsic characteristics of the product. So this is taste and consistency. So a lot of times when they're buying, they're looking at those visual aspects of the product, and then the post-purchase is that taste and that consistency. There are exceptions to this. For example, the Chiquita bananas, which are a very recognizable brand within the fruit industry. Or, for example, cotton candy grapes. Those are also a very recognizable brand within the fruit industry. So there are exceptions to this rule. Familiarity reduces cognitive effort for customers. So knowing what a brand is, knowing its brand identity, can actually reduce the amount of effort it does to think about, do I want this product or not? And it's another kind of shortcut that we do within the decision-making process. So it's a way to cut through some of that additional information that you have to share on a label or on signage to get across what you're trying to get across. So you're kind of hacking the psychology of the consumer again. When customers recognize something on a label, such as a brand, a phrase, an image, they don't spend as much time scanning other details of the product. So again, you're kind of hacking that process because they're like, oh, this is what this means. I already know what that means. Let me go to other parts of the product, such as actually looking at it or the price or looking at alternatives to help me justify and make the decision. Therefore, established brands are more likely to get customer attention because of that reduced cognitive load on thinking that it requires for the customer to do when they're looking at the different alternatives presented in front of them at the retail center. Another category of information that you may consider putting on your labels and presenting to your consumers is things related to sustainable practices and environmental awareness. Customers are becoming increasingly conscious of these different practices, and this can have an influence in their final purchase decision stemmed from ideas around consciousness of sustainability and environmental awareness. Similar to brand familiarity, many consumers prefer products that are labeled as organic, eco-friendly, or fair trade. And eco-conscious consumers are more likely to purchase products with labels that highlight sustainability. This often is an indicator for them on the environmental impacts, the level of carbon generated through the production and sourcing of the product, and the recyclability of the different products. And this can appeal a lot to environmentally conscious consumers. In the horticulture industry, consumers value locally sourced food and ornamental options. The tried and true made in the USA does perform better than imports from other countries. And when we look at more of the dialed down versions of that, such as local, we see that at farmers markets, which often have locally grown food, are increasingly becoming popular in the United States. For example, they went from about 1,700 to over 8,000 farmers markets, as reported in a report by the USDA in 2022. And this showed an average growth rate of 7% per year, meaning people are buying into the local concept. Many times, consumers often also associate locally grown food with being more sustainable, fresher, more nutritious, tastier, of higher quality, and supporting the local economy. And this bodes very well with many Americans. Local actually has a definition according to the USDA 2008 Farm Bill, but there's a lot of variability among consumers on how they perceive locality. There's some data that I collected with a graduate student a couple years ago where we actually showed with North Carolina consumers, they viewed local as within 100 miles of their home location. And 100 miles could be produce and the plants grown in Virginia all the way down to South Carolina. So it's very wild how variable this can be. However, the term local, very popular with people. Another statistic showed that in 2018, 55% of U.S. consumers consciously made an effort to buy locally grown food, and 48% of consumers purchased more local produce compared to the last 5 years. What's interesting about this is that they're also willing to pay a higher price for local, sustainable, or organic vegetables and herbs rather than ornamental plants. So even though there is a conscious effort in general, there seems to be a little bit of delay when it comes to ornamentals versus the edible category. However, that effect is still present. People are still wanting to support local and they want to support their neighbors. In floriculture specifically, consumers have an interest in purchasing locally grown plants and locally grown flowers, especially when they have that biodegradable or that compostable containers. Therefore, including origin information about plants on their labels actually improves purchase rates of locally grown produce or state-grown produce or even U.S.-grown products. So this information does make a difference for consumers. Along with sourcing information, nativeness of plants also can draw for eco-conscious consumers. Studies show that an increased market demand for native plants is in response to consumer education about native plants. Therefore, including that benefits information of planting native plants increases their likelihood to purchase and to want native plants. According to research done here at NC State, the perception of environmental benefits of native plants had a greater role in driving sales of the demographics of these consumers, therefore making these marketing efforts for native plants more generalized. So including this environmental information and talking about the different benefits that natives provide, including they can attract native pollinators, they can help in native soils, this can be a big impact for regional consumers. There's a high value being placed on also sustainably landscape practices. This includes pest control, irrigation, and fertilizer. And this can be another factor that can draw consumers into that native plant category. However, social norms are also affected by the perception of native plant aesthetics. And this is something that we as researchers are trying to understand is perception of natives is that they aren't as pretty or that they can grow slow. I've heard different industry members say that. However, the research behind that is a little bit lacking. And so understanding this more can make it a little bit more clear-cut on what we can share with consumers, as well as what consumer expectations are, which is a lot of flowers and a lot of green. Other label phrases to consider are things like water conserving and drought tolerant, or deer resistant or animal resistant. These are popular labelings to show different characteristics about the product, especially for, again, those eco-conscious consumers. What we know about consumers in states that have experienced drought is that they're more conscious about water-saving messages of plants that they have purchased. And some of it, they might not actually be actively in a drought currently, but they're still going to pay attention to that water-saving message. For example, I've done a study with Bridget Behe and Charlie Hall back in 2019, and what we found is that even though citizens in Florida and in Texas were not actively experiencing a drought, they historically, within the past years, had experienced a drought, and they were willing to pay more and willing to accept more with water-saving messages for plant purchases in these categories, rather than consumers up in Michigan who, in the past 5 years, had not experienced a drought. So they do remember those long-term implications. Another labeling phrase that you might consider is reduced fertilizer needs. Reducing fertilizer or less fertilizer needs can be appealing to ecologically conscious consumers who are looking to reduce their fertilizer runoff practices. What we know from ecologically sustainable practices is that using fewer fertilizers is ranked as one of the most important practices for ornamental plant production. And so these different messages like water conserving, drought tolerance, reduced fertilizer needs, these can appeal to certain demographics of consumers. And if that is the marketing strategy that you are going for, or a target market that you are trying to get into, these might be messages that can be very beneficial for you to consider. Alrighty, so let's bring it all together. Why does this matter? And at the end of the day, labeling makes a difference for retailers. Labeling does matter. A good label that is eye-catching, informative, and concise will increase sales of different products because of the factors of reduced consumer uncertainty and reduced cognitive load in the decision-making process. Labels build brand loyalty. Customers that seek success in keeping their plants alive due to information on the label and the level of involvement that they have with these different products are more likely to repurchase from brands. Consistency in branding will make your product stand out from your competitors and will cause quicker purchases from customers who recognize the product and recognize the brand. There are some label producers like MasterTag who even have advice on their websites on how to create a better plant label. So there's different resources you have available, including the information from this podcast, that you might consider to build a label or build a better label if you're seeking to do so. Retailers can leverage this information and use their labels as a marketing tool, not just an identifier of what the product is, so enhancing that buying process. Your plant label is like a silent salesperson. It's reassuring your consumer that they won't kill their plant by providing them with information they need to be successful. And they need the right information to be successful. So this can be a tool and something to assist you without you having to do extra effort. You may tailor your label to a broader audience or focus on more specific target markets depending on what your end goal is. This can be to beginning consumers, plant hobbyists, those eco-conscious consumers. It depends on who you're going for and therefore how you will tailor your label. Strong labels make retail products stand out and help build that loyalty. And in the end, of course, we want them to return and repurchase. And so it's important to have all those pieces of information together to help them do so. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Grow the Future. Be sure to subscribe, share with a fellow plant lover, and tune in next time as we continue to explore the world of horticulture. Until next time, keep growing.